What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Coach's Corner. Today we're talking about why your training program might be causing you to actually be a slower athlete. I love this topic because this is a mistake that I see people make all the time, especially in the college strength and conditioning setting when dealing with coaches. There's a few things that lead teams to actually be hurting their athletes' speed development. So, let's get started. So the first reason that I see that can lead to athletes getting slower is lifting too heavy. So what do I mean by lifting too heavy? When we look at power, when we look at speed, there's kind of a continuum. So there's two major attributes that contribute to power speed development. One of them is force, how much force you can apply. So think about a power lifter deadlifting large amounts of weight. And then the other feature is velocity or speed. So this is where you think about a track sprinter, a receiver in football. Somebody has to move at very high speeds, but isn't necessarily moving heavy loads. Most of us tend to spend too much time working on the force development in the weight room, and we neglect the velocity training that's actually going to improve our power and improve our overall speed. So what we need to do to actually develop speed in the weight room is spend less time working on the heavier weights and actually spend time working with 30 to 60% of our 1 rep max and trying to move those weights. This is the important part, trying to move those weights as fast as we can. So again, we're trying to move away from this force side of the power spectrum and start training our velocity and our speed with light weights, trying to move them as fast as possible. Okay? The second mistake that we look at is not taking enough rest. This is very, very prevalent in CrossFitters, in hockey players, in most kind of anaerobic athletes. They think that they need to be feeling overly strained to know that they're getting a good workout. And so what they often do is they shorten up their rest period. So let's take the analogy of a sprint workout. You do a 100-meter sprint, just to make it nice and simple. That takes you approximately 10 to 15 seconds. And then you're going to rest for at least 10 times the length that you worked. So 1 to 10 work-rest ratio. Most people, however, will do a sprint. It'll take them 10 to 15 seconds. And then they'll only rest for 15, 20, 30 seconds. Now, there's this concept in strength and conditioning called specific adaptation to imposed demands, or the SAID principle. All it means is the style of training we do dictates our adaptation. So if you train fast, you are actually going to adapt to be faster. But when we take short bouts of rest, what we don't allow is for our creatine phosphate system and our power system to recover so that we can actually go at full speed. So when you're doing power training, when you're trying to work on speed, you actually want to take long bouts of rest in between your sets to allow you to move as quickly as possible. Okay? The third piece I want to talk about is training frequency. So there's a couple different ways to look at this, but I like to look at the physiology behind this. Most people train too frequently to improve their speed. So after a heavy speed training session, after doing plyometric training, typically we want to wait about 72 hours before we go back into that mode of training, to go back into that speed training. Why 72 hours? Well, within 24 hours, your aerobic system is actually going to recover. Within 48 to 70 hours, your muscles are going to start to recover, but it's that nervous system that can take 3, even 4 days to fully recover. And it is the nervous system that allows you to move at rapid speeds. So again, try not, when your goal is speed development, to train too frequently or to train that specific muscle group too frequently. You want to try and get at least 72 hours between those power and speed sessions to allow yourself to fully recover your nervous system so you can move fast in your next bout of training. The next piece, and I'm going to get a little bit of hate on this one, but you're squatting too deep or you're moving through too much range of motion and that's making you slower. And I know all the Olympic lifters, the strength coaches out there are, going to hate this and say that, it's all about moving through full range of motion. Yes, I think that's great. I think that's important. I think it's great for joint health, functional strength. However, when we look at sports like football, hockey, any sort of sprinting sport, we're actually not going into deep end range hip, ankle, and knee flexion all the time. And again, the range of motion you train in dictates how you'll adapt. So if you're always training in the end range, you're getting very good at bouncing out of that end range. But for anyone who plays sports competitively, you know that the athletic position is not a full depth squat, it's actually a quarter squat. So that's why you see a lot of good strength coaches out there use the trap bar. It takes you through a lesser range of motion when you're doing power development. Another great tool is quarter depth squats. The things you used to do in high school when you didn't know how to squat. Those are actually very good for power development. So training through a lesser range of motion can help elicit a better power and speed output in those athletic positions that you actually use in sport. The fifth one I want to talk about is mobility. And I think mobility is important. I think mobility is great. But what you'll see in some of the fastest athletes in the world, in some of the best sprinters in the world, they actually have very tight Achilles tendons and IT bands and just kind of tighter lower body structures. Now, this can be a little contentious because we all know that having a decreased range of motion and poor motor control can lead to risk of injury. But on the opposite side of the token, you have what's called a stretch reflex. And when you have a joint that doesn't move too deep, so let's take the ankle, through range of motion, when you have a stiffer joint, you can actually use that elastic effect more effectively when sprinting. So this can be a harder one to navigate, but spending too much time on mobilizing your ankles, mobilizing your calves can actually hurt your speed development. So real quick guys, those were my 5 tips about your program and how it might be hurting your speed development. So let's go over them real quickly. Number 1, what we're looking at is you're spending too much time lifting heavy weights. To work on the velocity side of the power spectrum, you actually need to lift light weights. So we're talking squatting, deadlifting, pulling weights between 30 and 70% of our 1 rep max. Olympic lifting is a nice little exception because we're actually able to elicit high force output and high velocity at the same time. But when we're talking about compound lifts and you want to develop your speed, light weights, trying to move them as fast as we can. Tip number 2 is take more rest in between your sets. That is going to help you recover your nervous system fully so that you can actually work on that top end speed. Piece number 3, take more rest in between your workouts. Again, the nervous system takes about 72 hours plus or minus a bit to fully recover. So when you're constantly training day after day after day, you might not get the same speed adaptation that you're looking for. Piece number 4, don't always train through full range of motion. Spending some time on partial range of motion exercises, quarter squats, trap bar deadlifts, things of that nature can actually have a greater transfer to sprinting and running than you might expect. Lastly, you might not want to stretch too much. Again, the elastic effect in a stiff ankle can actually provide better speed development than a looser one. So those are my 5 tips, guys. Comment down below if you have any questions or if you disagree. We'd love to talk about it.